Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Locked On NBA Top 100 player list is out, and I am reacting to where I ranked Wolves players compared to where the rest of the Locked On hosts ranked Wolves players. I'll tell you where they were wrong, where I still think I'm right, and also some of the other large discrepancies on my list versus that one. Where did Rudy Gobert fall on this list? Surprised me a little. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season kicked off this weekend, and right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Download the app at FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. And we are just a couple of weeks away from Media Day, the start of training camp. And what better time to release the Locked On NBA Top 100 player list than this week? And it is out right now. You can go check it out. I'm going to tell you right now where I ranked guys compared to where everybody else ranked guys. I'll tell you where I was right. And I think other people may have missed the mark a little bit, certainly on Wolves players, but also more broadly, there were some surprising results here on this list. So we're going to dig in. We'll start with Wolves players, and then we'll get to some of the other ones that I ranked very differently than others. And I'll give my reasoning why and why I stand by my top 100 list that I did individually as part of this process. So Locked On NBA Top 100 today. That is what we'll do on the show. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So a few weeks ago, back when I did the initial submission of the top 100, I talked a little bit about where I was ranking players. That was a while ago. And now I have the full list in front of me of where everybody else ranked players. And you can find the full list on Locked On Sports Today. You can watch on YouTube. You can find some additional discussion there about this list and also on X. It's been posted by our channels, or it is being posted here today, Monday. But I'm going to give you, I'm not going to list all 100 guys, don't worry. But I'm going to tell you where I had Wolves players ranked versus where the rest of the hosts ranked them. So this is all Locked On NBA hosts. So all teams, some teams have two hosts. It includes the women's basketball podcast. It includes the college basketball podcast. And, anybody that's NBA adjacent has submitted as part of this list. So let's start with how many Timberwolves players are on the list. There are 5 Wolves players in the top 100. Maybe not surprising. And yes, it is. 4 of the 5 starters plus Reid. Obviously, Mike Conley did not make the top 100. But otherwise, it was 4 starters minus Conley plus Reid are the 5 that are in the top 100. Of course, Anthony Edwards is first. And the crazy, and since he's so high, I'll just kind of do the top 6, I guess, on my list versus the top 6 on the overall list. Strikingly similar. I think it's pretty much a consensus who the top 3 guys are, really top 4. And my list was identical to the top 100 list. Nikola Jokic, number 1, SGA, number 2, Giannis Antetokounmpo, number 3, and Luka Doncic, number 4. My list is the same as the overall list. Now, where it gets different is number 5, and it's still close. I had Anthony Edwards, number 5 in the NBA on my list. The final lockdown list had Steph Curry, number 5. I had Steph 6. And the final lockdown list had had Ant 6. So Ant and Steph are flipped. That's the only difference in the top 6 on both lists. I can't really quibble with it. I understand the Steph track record. I understand, technically Ant beat Steph head-to-head in the playoffs. Steph played in one game in the second round series, and the Warriors won that game, even though he left early. So I get it. I think in a vacuum right now, it's hard to argue that Steph Curry's a better player than Anthony Edwards because Steph just isn't, for a while he was an above average defender. That's not the case anymore. And he's also a little bit more limited overall offensively. So I think it's a hard thing to argue that Steph's better than Ant, but I understand it if you want to make that argument. The way this list is supposed to work, the criteria is right now this season. So, of course, we still ranked guys like Tyrese Halliburton and Jason Tatum and other players that have longer term injuries, Kyrie Irving, right? Like they're on this list. So it's not like literally in this moment can a guy who just tore his Achilles be better than somebody? Well, no, but like for this season, where are we ranking these players? And I think track record weighs into it. So like we're going to get into some other names on here, and I think we can evaluate what certain players are going to look like this year based, like the track record is one piece to the puzzle. It's one piece of the equation. Well, I like to look at it akin to like draft prep for NBA or NFL. Those are the two that stand out, right? So like the combine for either sport is not like why you're drafting guys. The Senior Bowl for football is not, why you're drafting guys. March Madness performance versus conference play versus non-conference play. Like none of those things in a vacuum are the reason you do or don't draft somebody. They're all part of the equation. So a great combine performance for an NFL draft prospect, a great pro day performance is going to be part of the formula where you decide, is this guy the guy? But just because he runs the fastest 40 doesn't mean he's the best player. And I would argue that track record and more recent history would influence where a player should be ranked. So we have to be Cooper Flagg's on this list. I did not put Cooper Flagg in my top 100 because I struggled with what do I do with a guy that I haven't seen play at the NBA level. And I'll tell you right now, like he finished on the overall lockdown list at 80 and he wasn't in my top 100 because I have a tough time projecting that. Like how are we supposed to do that? Like I'm not going to sit here right now and argue that Cooper Flagg is better than, well, actually he finished one spot ahead of Naz Reid on this list. I don't know that Cooper Flagg's better than Naz Reid this year. I mean, he might be, but it's a hard thing to argue, So all that to say, I think like the last few years of history, the track record matters, and last year more than any other year matters. You also got to consider, what if a player has an injury, how might that impact them this season? So the Steph track record, I understand it. I had him one spot behind Ant. Some people had him one spot before, and that's where he ended up, was fifth, and Ant was sixth on the big list. I had Ant fifth and Steph sixth. It gets a little weird starting at 7, my list compared to overall the top 20 is very similar, but I had some guys like in the teens that were in the, 7, 8, 9, 10 range on the big list. But I want to talk Wolves guys before we get into those. Although I think that's pretty fascinating. So the next Timberwolf on the list, you got to go all the way down to the 40s to find Julius Randle. I ranked Julius Randle 39th on my list. Randle finished 43rd on the big list. Okay, so according to the Locked On NBA Top 100, there's only one Timberwolves player in the top 40 of the league, and Julius Randle is at 43. And that also means that there are 4 Timberwolves between, the 41 and 100. Julius is 43. I had him 4 spots higher at 39. The players, like obviously there were a handful of players that were ahead of him on the big list, but like the players that were ahead of him on this list that I had behind him, let's see. Well, Trae Young would be 1. Trae Young is a lot higher on the national list. Trae Young's 26 on the national list. I had Trae at 40. I had him 1 spot behind Julius Randle. Others like Draymond Green's another one. There's a whole. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. Draymond Green, I actually had slightly ahead of Julius Randle, and on the national list, he's lower. So that's a big discrepancy. We'll talk about some of those other big differences here in a minute. But Julius at 43, I think, is just a little bit too low. I mean, he was the second best player on a conference finals team last year. He really kind of dominated in the first and second round against the Lakers and the Warriors. And I think that has to factor in. I think playoff performance and the body of work of last season has to factor in. The fact that this guy is now a multi-time All-Star that's been an All-NBA, third teamer, to have him as low as 43, I just think that's a few spots too low. And I don't think it's right that, what has Trae Young done? And again, you could argue in a vacuum. Could you argue Trae Young's a better player than Julius Randle? Sure. But there's a lot of things Julius Randle does is good or better. And the overall team track record is as good or better as Trae Young. Next we'll talk about where the other 3 Timberwolves players are on this list and compare that to where I have them. And then we'll also talk about some of the biggest discrepancies between my list and the national list when it comes to other non-Timberwolves players. I think it's pretty fascinating. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. The NFL season kicked off last Thursday. A fun slate. Sunday Night Football was awesome this week. Bills and Ravens, with, of course, the Bills eking out a win on a last-second field goal. Fun game tonight, Bears, Vikings. FanDuel, make sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer right now. New customers at FanDuel can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is a ton of fun. It makes every single game more exciting. You can, of course, wager ahead of time. Maybe it's you want to play the money line or whatever. Maybe it's the same game parlay. You can also live bet. Maybe you're just watching your team and FanDuel's going to accompany you along that journey. Maybe tonight it is the Vikings playing the Bears and they are your team. Also, you can keep an eye on your fantasy lineup there as well. And FanDuel just helps add a little bit more fun and energy to the viewing experience. Next Monday, there's 2 Monday night games. That's fun to track both those at the same time. If you're ready to play, just download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, so we talked about Ant. I had Ant 5. National list had him 6. We talked about Julius Randle. I had Julius Randle at 39. The national list had him at 43. Next up is Rudy Gobert. And I should have prepared myself for Rudy being ranked as low as he was nationally. I had him at 45 on my list, which actually felt a little low to me. Like I had him one spot below LaMelo Ball. That was difficult for me. I think Rudy Gobert has a much bigger impact on winning than LaMelo Ball. I really struggled with this. LaMelo Ball is an outstanding offensive player. Like in a vacuum, if you're these are all different ways to look at this, right? Obviously, LaMelo Ball is a better offensive player than Rudy Gobert, but has LaMelo Ball ever won anything? Have his teams ever gotten past the play-in? No. Rudy Gobert wins every year. So I put Rudy at 45. I had LaMelo Ball at 44. But nationally, Rudy Gobert was not in the top 50 on this list. He was at 51. And I did a short, like a 1-minute video for Locked On about Rudy not being top 50. And I just think it's crazy. A guy that just won Defensive Player of the Year, he's 1 year removed from winning his 4th Defensive Player of the Year award. He's still only, 32. He's a future Hall of Famer, and the track record stuff all matters. He's only once been led a defense that's not a top 10 defense since his rookie year as a main part of the rotation. Only one time has he not led a defense that finished in the top 10 league wide. Yeah, the rebounding took a bit of a hit last year. The volume went down in terms of his scoring. Not that there was ever really high volume, especially in a Wolves uniform, but he had the ball in his hands less and he scored less. He rebounded less, but he was also being asked to do a little bit, to defend differently. He was out on the perimeter a little bit more. I don't see a world in which Rudy Gobert is not a top 50 player. And I think it's kind of crazy that like on the national list, LaMelo Ball was 3 spots ahead of him. Tyler Hero was a spot ahead of Rudy Gobert on the national list. I just don't get it. Let's see who else. Jalen Johnson was ahead of him on the national list. Kyrie Irving, injury and all, ahead of him on the national list. I get that one a little bit more. But I don't even, where did I have Kyrie? I had Kyrie in the late, at like 67 on my list. He was 40 overall. Ivica Zubac was really good last year. Still probably an underrated player. But he is further ahead of Rudy Gobert than I think makes any sort of sense. In fact, I had Zubac much lower on my list. I don't know. I really struggle with it. Actually, sorry, I looked at the wrong thing. I actually did have him slightly ahead of Rudy, but not as much ahead of Rudy as on the national list. I mean, the national list has him 12 spots ahead of Rudy. And again, impact on winning has to be factored in here. Do their teams win? Rudy's teams win. I don't get how he's not a top 50 player. Jaden McDaniels was much closer. I had Jaden at 62. The national list had him at 65, so I was only 3 spots ahead. Nothing like too crazy. I had him actually slightly ahead of Lu Dort. Nationally, he was more ahead of Lu Dort than that. Those are kind of the closest comps there in that same range. Dyson Daniels, I actually had a few spots ahead of Jaden, and Dyson Daniel, actually about the same on the national list. So not too much to quibble with there. I think having him in the 60s makes sense. If he kind of ups that scoring a little bit more this year, if the three-point shooting bounces back just a little, we could be talking pretty easily about a top 50 player when we're looking at this list next year. Then the last Timberwolves player on this list, similar, I have Naz Reid at 78. He finished at 81 on the national list. So again, I missed by only 3 spots on where the other Locked On hosts had Naz Reid ranked. I had him ahead of I don't know who, I had him right ahead of Zach LaVine. I had him ahead of Brandon Ingram. Again, similar places to on the national list. Brandon Ingram on the national list, by the way, was 63. I had Brandon Ingram at 80 on my list. So nothing really to quibble with on Naz. I will mention I had Dante DiVincenzo just outside the top 100. He did not make it on the top 100 list. I had him at 102 when I did my overall rankings. And on the national list, he did not make it. Somebody that did make it, Nickeil Alexander-Walker finished 97th on the Locked On top 100 list. I did not have Nickeil in my top 100. That surprised me a little. I don't know that in a vacuum, I would argue that Nickeil is a better player than Dante DiVincenzo. I think it's very close, and they obviously do very different things. And I know that now, Nickeil is going to get, I think, average salary is going to be more than Dante. It's very, very close. It depends on what your team needs, and that's why this is such a tricky list, especially the way basketball is, right? Like these guys all play a role on their specific teams, and I think that should factor into how this list is ranked. Like, is a guy playing his role more so than the role another guy's given, like in a better way than somebody else is playing their role, not always just in a vacuum who's the better player. So I thought that was pretty interesting. We can start to look at some of the other kind of notables here. The one that I want to start with at the top of the list, Victor Wembanyama. Wemby was 7 on the national list, which I just think is still so aggressive. And look, the NBA is going to be way more fun if Wemby's healthy and good, and I hope he is. And I absolutely think he could be a top 10 player this year if he stays healthy, maybe even top 5 in the next year to 2 years. That's absolutely on the table. But I think it's a little crazy to have him ranked 7th. I mean, Wemby only played in 46 games last year. But it's not just that. Like when he got hurt, the Spurs were still 6 games under 500. And if you're a top 7 player, no matter how bad the rest of your team is, you're not below 500 at that point in the season. You're just not. I mean, look at the other guys on this list. Jokic, SGA, Giannis, Doncic, Steph, and Ant are all ahead of Victor Wembanyama on the national list. Those guys all didn't have to worry about flirting with the 500 mark that deep into the season. Yes, they all have better players around them. I get it. But if you're a top 7 player, I just think you lift your roster more than that. And that's my biggest criticism, and that and lack of track record. Like we're still talking, I know it's not entirely his fault that he's not on the floor, but we're still talking about a guy that's only played 117 NBA games. And the shot blocking is incredible. The efficiency is incredible. The stuff he can do, the way he shoots the ball at his size. Like I'm not, and this is gonna, the whole probably rest of the show is going to come across as I'm just like, putting down these amazing players. That's not what I'm trying to do, but the whole function of this exercise is ranking players. And I think he's ranked a little too high. I had Wemby at 16 on my list. I have him a spot behind Evan Mobley. I have him a spot ahead of Karl Anthony Towns. I just don't know how we can argue that he's 9 spots better than Evan Mobley, who impacted winning at a really impressive rate for Cleveland last year, who was a key cog on a top 3 defense and did, it's more than just blocking shots too, right? Wemby's incredible. He's probably got to do a little bit more. Like, I'm curious to see if he gets into the paint a little bit more, plays closer to the basket on offense. The offensive rebounding is pretty, it's just maybe lower impact than I would have expected for Wemby. Overall, you want him to get to the free throw line more often. This is a guy who's an 81% free throw shooter, The 3-point percentage of the 3-point attempt, like He attempted too many threes this last year. Like nearly half of his shots were from outside the arc, and he was 35%. So I think as the shot selection gets tweaked, maybe gets a few more offensive boards here and there. I absolutely, if he plays 70 plus games this year, he's probably a top 10 player. But I just think we can't crown him with that yet. And I have a tough time. Like the guys I have ahead of Wemby that nationally were not ahead of him: Jalen Brunson, Donovan Mitchell, Anthony Edwards, Kawhi Leonard. We'll talk more about Kawhi in a minute, and AD as well. LeBron James, Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton, Kevin Durant, Evan Mobley, and then Wemby. One spot ahead of Karl Anthony Towns, two ahead of Cade Cunningham, three ahead of Jaylen Brown. And I stand by having him at 16. I want to talk about AD, Kawhi, Jimmy Butler, a couple other guys that I had ranked very differently. And then also toward the back end of the top 100, there's some others: Tumani Kamara, CJ McCollum. I had these guys much higher than where the National List had them. And then some other interesting ones that I want to point out. And that's how we'll close the show here today. All right. Other notables in the ESPN top 100, Locked On NBA top 100. I'm so excited that we have our own list this year, and I'm just so used to having to go off of the list from some of the other outlets, and to have our own list that we actually ranked is amazing. And I still throws me off a little bit that we turned this list around, and it's a good list too. As much as I'm disagreeing with some of my fellow hosts here on a few of these rankings. So, like, I have Anthony Davis number 9. I just think he's still, and you have to factor in the injury concerns, the age, etc. But when he plays, his teams win. He was the second best team on the title team, just 5 years ago. And even just the last couple of years was a big piece in the Lakers still being competitive when the rest of that roster this side of him and LeBron was just not very good. And, I think Dallas could be pretty decent in a very difficult Western Conference with AD. I have him 9. Nationally, he was 14. I have Kawhi Leonard 10. Nationally, he was 17 in the Locked On NBA top 100 list. I think the track record really matters. I get back to that. He was all NBA second team just the year before last year. Like just the year before last season, at the, in his age 32 season, he was all NBA second team. He was an all-star, 24 points a game, 42% on 3-point shots. Like the 3-point shooting percentage has been over 42% each of the last 3 years, or over 41%, which he had only done once in the first 10 years of his career. And all this after the significant injury that caused him to miss the whole 21-22 season. Yeah, he's older. He's another year older. It's going to be his age 34 season. But I still think he's a top 10 player when he's healthy. And I think he was healthy enough last year to give us a picture of what that looks like. And still just as impactful. It didn't really slip significantly defensively. Obviously not anywhere near where he was back in his Spurs days or even when he first joined the Clippers. But he's still a plus defensive player. And I think it's fair to put him at 10. And I should say nationally, he was on the Locked On NBA top 100. He was 17. On the flip side, Devin Booker. So I had Kawhi ranked much higher. I had Anthony Davis ranked much higher. Devin Booker nationally was ranked 18. This one's the craziest one to me. I had Devin Booker at 23, and that was still a little bit higher than I probably should have had him. It was still 5 points lower than the big list. The Locked On NBA top 100 has him at 18. I have him at 23. I don't know how you put Devin Booker ahead of Karl Anthony Towns. I don't know how you put Devin Booker, ahead of Jaylen Brown, Pascal Siakam. Like, it doesn't make sense to me for so many reasons. But again, we have to look at what he's done recently. Just last season, Devin Booker shot just 33% from 3 on high volume. His defense was worse than ever. Like, just really a negative on defense, very clearly negative on defense. And his team was bad. He's not impacting winning. He's still a very gifted offensive player. He's almost impossible to slow down when he gets going in the mid-range. He's one of the very few, like, plus mid-range jump shooting guys. And just a couple of years ago, he was all NBA third team. He was all NBA first team 4 years ago. He's still a 4-time All-Star. Again, all NBA third team just 2 years ago. But last season was not good. He shot almost 40% of his shots from three, and he was 33%. An absolute catastrophic disaster defensively. And this is well playing with Kevin Durant and whatever Bradley Beal was last year on a bad team. And I don't know what the argument is for Devin Booker being a top 20 player. I just don't. And I had him at 23. And frankly, like looking at my list, I probably should have had J-Dub ahead of him, Jalen Williams. You could argue Domantas Sabonis ahead of him. You could argue Bam Adebayo ahead of him. Upper and Şengün, Darius Garland. Like, I still had him ahead of all those guys, but barely. I had him behind Pascal Siakam by a spot, 2 spots behind Jimmy Butler, which I stand by 100%. A few spots behind Paolo Banchero. Jaylen Brown is an obvious one to me. I think Jaylen Brown's just a better player than Devin Booker. If Devin Booker's the best player on your team, he's going to score a bunch, but you're not like he's a better scorer than Jaylen Brown. Yeah, obviously. But he's not going to give you a fraction of what Jaylen Brown does defensively. And Jaylen Brown is still a plus offensive player. So I don't know the argument why Devin Booker would be ahead of him. Jimmy Butler, I have 21, which is 8 spots higher than the national number 29. And here's the thing. Clearly, the injury was bothering him in the playoffs last year. I think he's a better player than that. Just a couple of years ago, he dragged a not great Miami team to the conference final, actually to the finals before that. I think Jimmy Butler still has a plus impact on winning. And I have him ranked ahead of Devin Booker. Like, Jimmy Butler hasn't really been on bad teams. Devin Booker has a lot. So even at Jimmy Butler's age, I think he needs to be ahead of Devin Booker, and I've got him at 21. Jalen Williams, I had at 25. Nationally, he's at 20, so I had him 5 spots lower. That one I struggle with a little bit. I maybe should have put him a little bit higher. I had him 1 spot ahead of Domantas Sabonis. That was probably a mistake. Sabonis, by the way, I had at 24, 8 spots higher than nationally. He was at 32. So that's one that I think I might have missed on. I probably should have had Sabonis a little lower, should have had J-Dub a little bit higher. I had Bam Adebayo at 26. Nationally, he's at 31. I had him 5 spots higher. I stand by that. I think Adebayo's underrated. I think without him, Miami's would have been a disaster the last couple of years. I obviously Jimmy's dealt with more injuries the last couple of years before he was traded. But Adebayo at 26, I think makes a lot of sense. Draymond Green, I had at 38. The Nationalists had him all the way down at 53. So I had him 15 spots higher. Again, track record matters. The defensive impact still matters. I know he's just like doesn't give you anything offensively. Didn't ever really give you much, but even less now. I don't know. I don't have a huge problem with that. The ones that are way different toward the bottom, I had Toumani Camara at 81. The young Blazer, I have him at 81. He finished 100 on the list. So I had him 19 spots higher. I had CJ McCollum 82. He finished 98. So I had him 16 spots higher. On the flip side, I had Paul George at 83. Paul George finished at 76 on the big list, a spot behind Kristaps Porzingis. I actually had him a couple spots ahead of Porzingis on my list. So I don't know. I don't have a huge problem with those ones. I think Camara should have been higher than 100. I understand McCollum maybe being a little bit lower than where I had him at 82. But, you know, no other Wolves players, as I said earlier, and nothing crazy in the bottom 10. I had, by and large, the same guys, just in a little bit of a different order. Like, I had Emmanuel Quickley 100. Quickley was 86 on the big list. I had Peyton Pritchard 92. He was 96 on the big list. I had Jakob Poeltl 99. He was 93 on the big list. So I was within like 5 spots on most of these guys, which is actually kind of crazy when you think about it. Christian Brown was 91 on the big list. I had him at 96. RJ Barrett 95 on the big list. I have him at 98. So these guys are all really close. The biggest ones were I had Quickley 14 spots lower, Camara 19 spots higher, McCollum 16 higher, Paul George 7 lower. Otherwise, kind of the bottom 10, 15, 20 are about, pretty much roughly the same. By the way, Cooper Flagg was the only rookie, I believe, that made this list, and he was at 80. I did not have Cooper Flagg on my top 100 list, as I mentioned earlier. I just think that's a really tough thing to try and parse, and so I left him off. All right, we'll have a little bit more analysis of this list later in the week. I want to see what some of the other shows do to react to it. Perhaps we'll have some crossover or, guests on to talk about the list later in the week. We are back to 5 shows, by the way, so I'll be back tomorrow, Monday through Friday, every day this week. There's there was an ESPN article about Hall of Fame odds for current NBA players for their future prospects to making the Hall of Fame. I want to talk about that. Probably do that on tomorrow's show. A couple more things I want to hit here as we get throughout the week. We're just maybe a week away from truly starting to preview stuff as we get much closer to training camp. So a big week ahead. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can watch, on YouTube and on the app as well. Of course, the Locked On Top 100 is here, and it was voted on by our hosts across the NBA podcast network at Locked On. Experts that cover these teams and players every day. You can watch it Locked On Sports today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Don't miss the reaction throughout the week across the Locked On channels to this list. It's a ton of fun. It's a fun kind of speculative time of year. This is a really fun way to kind of put a cap on what's been a pretty eventful offseason overall. Of course, Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast. We'll catch you next time.